Okay, we are. Yeah, we are. Looks like we're live. Okay, so thank you both for attending tonight's forum. We have our moderator, Menachem Light, who is a small business owner and a resident here in Crown Heights, and Josh Pierre, who is a candidate for City Council for the 40th District. So I will turn it over now to Menachem. Menachem, the ball is all yours.
Thanks, Avi. First of all, I know you guys are jealous. You want this headset. You like the headset. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So first of all, huge yasher koyach and thank you to Avi Leshes for putting this together and for COL Live for hosting the event. Nice to meet you, Josh. We were talking before. It was really good meeting you. So talking for myself as someone who knows very little about politics, Josh, could you give us more color on the roles and responsibilities of a city council member?
Okay. Well, first of all, Zagazun to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with members of a community that very few people realize, but I actually grew up in the Crown Heights community, in the middle of the Jewish community. My family originally lived on Union Street between Kingston and Albany, right near the shul. So it's just a neighborhood I'm very familiar with that I got to see all the time growing up. Now, in terms of the council members, the New York City Council has certain powers that are below the state and the federal level. The way I tend to describe it to my community members, no matter what community they're from, is when you step outside of your home in the morning, most of the things you see are impacted by the city council. That means if you see garbage that's not picked up or is picked up, if you have alternate side of the street parking issues, if your kids are going to school or they're not going to good schools, and things of that nature, transportation, how you get around, and how the local businesses in particular are doing, a lot of that is impacted by the city council. What are the powers that we have? We pass laws in conjunction with the mayor. We have a massive budget of almost $97 billion. And so there's a lot we can do for local communities, and there's a lot we can do in terms of relief for small businesses.
That's really great to hear. You mentioned garbage. I know my wife would definitely want to have words with you about that. But that's for a later date. So it's good to hear that you're born and bred in Crown Heights, because talking for myself, I'm also born and bred in Crown Heights. I'm a local resident right now, and I'm a small business owner as well in Crown Heights. So everything you're saying resonates, and it's important for me because it has an impact in my day-to-day. And so, on a micro level, the things that are happening in our day-to-day life are things that the city council member definitely impacts. And so in your perspective, why is it so important that we vote, and why are elections so important? How does that play a role in in the bigger scheme of things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just for clarity, I wasn't born in Crown Heights. I was born in Haiti, but Crown Heights was where I first lived when I moved to the United States. I came here when I was 5 years old. In terms of the importance of voting, it's important that every community votes. It's not simply a matter of electing somebody like me, Josh Pierre, but it's also a reflection of that community's potential political power and prowess. When the more powerful elected officials are looking at the needs of different communities, they also have in the back of their heads who's voting, when are they voting, why are they voting, and in what numbers that they vote. So I'm saying to you the same thing I say to people in the Black community, in the Caribbean community, and in the Hispanic community. Your voting numbers really do matter, and you vote. Voting as a community has always been beneficial because it shows that whatever the needs of that community are, they're all behind it, and they're all willing to step forward as a group and make demands for it. So the Democratic primaries, we have to be honest with ourselves, this is a Democratic town. This city council will remain in the hands of Democrats, 99% sure of that. It's very likely that we'll have a Democratic mayor. So for people not to participate in the Democratic primaries is a very foolish mistake.
And just to dig a little deeper in the city council, this city council race, what is the margin of, like, in terms of normally when a city council member wins his or her district, by what percentage do they win? Does 1,000 votes make a difference? Does 500 votes make a difference?
Yeah, depending on the race, 100 votes can make the difference. So, if you are in a district where 2,000 people are going to come out and vote, those 100 votes will make a difference. If in any race, 100 vote can make the difference, to be quite honest with you. We had a national election back in, I want to say 2001, where 400 votes made the difference. And so that determined the presidency. So everybody's vote does matter. And depending on how many people come out, those votes can actually determine the election itself.
That's great. And so let's dig a little deeper and talk about your record, right? What are some of the successes and your legislative agenda that you've done and things that you're proud of?
Well, so just so you know, my background is that I'm a former financial analyst for the Office of the New York City Comptroller. And then later on, in a separate life, I became the Brooklyn Borough Director, which means that I was responsible for constituency services, et cetera. So some of the things that we're looking to do is we're looking at property taxes, because a lot of people in communities like ours and in this district are what you would call house rich, but cash poor. And what that means is they purchased a home maybe a few years ago or many years ago. The value of that home has gone up significantly, but that does, and so, maybe something they bought for $600,000 becomes $2 million or some numbers like that. But that doesn't mean the person is a millionaire, right? It just means the value has gone up. They haven't yet captured that value, but their property taxes have gone up in tangent with those property values. So you're being taxed as if you're a millionaire, but in fact, you're just a hardworking guy or gal who has a home that's worth a lot of money, but you're not selling it. So you're not capturing that value, but you're being taxed to the hilt. One of the things that I want to do, and it's a policy that was worked on while I was the borough director for the office of Comptroller Scott Stringer, is look at how we can provide some type of property tax relief for a lot of the folks in the community who've seen their property values go up, but they can't necessarily afford to pay those property taxes. The other thing we want to do is look at how different commercial corridors are being unnecessarily fined excessively, and how we can improve that and negate, basically reduce the number of fines that are happening, because you're paying a fine because you're doing something wrong. It shouldn't be a revenue driver for the city. The city shouldn't just fine you just because it's trying to make more revenue.
Yeah, that's definitely something that resonates and is important to people in our community. As a local business owner, the issues, so we've had some fines and stuff like that, but I think the biggest issue that we were concerned about is security. We've had, over the last 2 years, probably about, I would say, over 20 break-ins in terms of to our business alone. And that's been really tough on us. And it's not just the property damage and things like that. It's also, once you find the culprit and he or she is arrested, then with the bail reform and other things, they're released, and the same person can come again, and we have that issue. It could be multiple times with the same people. So and in general, as a community member, we're definitely very sensitive to security. So how do you have any impact on the security needs of our community, and how do you see that? How do you see your agenda helping us with that?
Yeah, so definitely I can commiserate in terms of the importance of security. There's a couple of things that you guys might not know about me. One, growing up, I would say that my parents' apartment was broken into 1, 2, 3 times. And each time the burglar came in and they took everything we had, and we had to start over from scratch. Or they at least took the most valuable things in our homes, and we had to start over from scratch. So I understand what that means when somebody violates your personal space and they take something that belongs to you, and you feel that you have no means of recourse, etc. And we did call the police, etc., but very little happened, right? And so the key is crime prevention. Another thing happened during my lifetime that has touched me personally, and it's prioritized security for me and in my family, which is about 3 or 4 years ago, my mother, she was the victim of a shooting, and thank God she survived it. But once that bullet leaves the gun, life changes forever for that person, right? So I do understand the value and the need of policing and security. It just has to be done in the right manner. So what has actually worked for us? Well, community-based policing has been very successful. With community-based policing, you have the same set of officers assigned to particular neighborhoods. And what that means is that police officer who becomes a beat cop walking along Kingston Avenue, gets to know who's living in the community, gets to become familiar with them. And so it makes it easier for them to understand what's going on when it happens. And it makes it easier for you as the community member to feel comfortable approaching that officer, having conversations with them and saying, hey, I've noticed some strange things happening. This is what I see. This is what I see. That connection between police officers who want to serve the community and community members is what helps with crime prevention, because what you're doing there is preventing an issue before it becomes a real problem.
That makes sense. And so there's been a lot of talk about yeshiva curriculum and yeshiva education. And so, as a community, we're obviously very sensitive to that, as we're all yeshiva graduates, and it's something that we are very proud of. So how do you look at that, and what do you say to those people that have issues with that education system?
Okay, I'm not a yeshiva grad. The closest I can say that I came to being a yeshiva grad is that I'm a graduate of Baruch College. So that's the closest but I come from a country where people spend 50% of their income to make sure that their kids are educated. Education is highly prized and valuable to me. And I also come from a public school system where a significant portion of my teachers were from the Jewish community. So I'm very well versed in the history and the culture of various parts of the Jewish community, various sects, etc. So I do understand the need for each community to make the determination as to how it wants to educate their children. The key is to ensure on our end as government that kids are getting a proper education and they're getting the basic elements of how to function in life, how to read, writing, arithmetic, etc. Thereafter, it's really up to the community, because these are essentially private schools that are determining their kids' education. The one thing I will say is, having looked at this issue with yeshiva tuitions and funding, I do see how the state is the place where things are most likely to happen. And pragmatically speaking, it looks like some type of tax credit is what would be most doable from what I've seen over the past few years. This is an issue that's been brought to us, not just from the Crown Heights community, but I do have a closer relationship with the community in the Midwood section and Rabbi Ralbag, where we've discussed this quite a few times, and it's something that they continue to push for. And I do think some type of relief is needed. I think a tax credit is probably the thing that's most likely to happen and should be pushed for.
That makes sense. Thanks. And so just going back to the yeshiva education and graduates. So, my company is a local based Crown Heights company, and I would say probably 80-90% of our employees, our rank and file employees, are yeshiva graduates from our community. We're all about supporting our community, and I really think that a lot of our success is because of that. So I really feel like the yeshiva system does a better job than many other educational systems, and I'm very proud of it. So yeah. I'm happy to hear that you share the same. And so going back to, security and violence, there's a lot of shootings. The gun violence is definitely up. People are fearful. And so I know you mentioned community policing, but is there any other insight you can give us in terms of how to bring back New York City to a place where it feels safer? Yes.
So just like you have a very unique community that has very unique experiences, all the communities that surround you, you might not be as familiar with the communities around you, but they have unique, different experiences, and you have to meet each community in its own way. When it comes to yeshivas, I believe you have to meet the Jewish community, the Orthodox and Hasidim in their own way. And when it comes to the Caribbean and Black community, you have to meet them in their own way, or you will not achieve a certain level of success and you will not meet your intended goals. So how do we achieve a certain level gun violence reduction. What has been successful in Crown Heights and in Flatbush and East Flatbush is that we have these nonprofit organizations. They're called Cure Violence Organizations. They help go into the community. They engage directly with sometimes the gang members, and they try to get them to turn in their guns. They try to do gun violence prevention so that you don't get to the point where there is a shooting. And the other thing that I would say is due to higher than normal unemployment rates, we have found that people who are unemployed are more likely to engage in these situations. So we've always looked down, or at least I myself have always looked down the path of workforce production, making sure folks are employed, getting them into jobs, because one of the best cures to criminality and violence is a well-paid job.
That makes sense. So, talking about security, what we've seen is a lot of the, incidents that have happened in our community have been from maybe people that are not 100% stable, homelessness and mentally ill. And you've seen that in some of the footage where there are people from local homeless shelters that are, they need help. So is there some way to address that issue where there are people that are doing things, there are people that are having an impact on our security, but it's more of a mental issue than a physical, issue?
Yes, absolutely. And I thank you for asking this question. I think in many communities, people are just now coming to terms with the concept of mental health. For a lot of communities, for a long time, it was just like either you're normal or you're crazy behavior, etc. What we're finding then is that even on the jails on Rikers Island, about 40% of those people who are on Rikers Island have mental health issues. And what has driven their behavior is the fact that they have not received the mental health that they need. And mental health can be an issue across all cultures and communities, but it's the access to the help that determines the person's overall outcome. So what do we want to do? In our public school systems, what we would like to do is fund a robust force of mental health professionals to identify behavioral issues early on from elementary to middle school so that those issues are treated. It's really the same thing that they do in suburban middle-class communities across the country, except in our public schools, we have not funded these things. So what we're doing is basically deterring this pipeline of school to prison and turning it into a pipeline of mental health and wellness. But your question is really what to do about the folks that are out there right now. We don't want to create a situation that we saw in Crown Heights about 2, maybe 3 years ago, where there was a gentleman on Utica Avenue. He had mental health issues. The police showed up. Nobody understood what was going on, and he ended up being shot. Had there been a mental health professional there with the police officer, there would have been a better outcome, and everybody would have understood the value of the mental health person in that situation and the police officer in that situation. So we have to have mental health services coupled with policing. We can't just send in police to do the job of mental health professionals because that's not what they're trained for. And so, we are going to invest in having social services go out more aggressively, engage folks that are on the street, and try to get them into the right places. But with regards to homelessness, remember, homelessness means you do not have a home. The lack of a home is what makes you homeless. So the cure to homelessness is providing people with permanent, affordable housing.
Definitely. I mean, in our community, it's really hard. Housing is obviously very expensive and it's a scarce commodity. And so how do you feel like you can impact affordable housing?
Yeah, that is actually where I can have the most impact of any other candidate. I'm the only candidate in my race that has actually financed the construction of over 3,000 units of real affordable housing. My background there is I was the senior financial analyst at the Office of the New York City Comptroller for ETI, and our job was using pension money to finance affordable housing. And when I say affordable housing, I mean 2 bedrooms for $1,200 a month, that type of thing. Housing that is affordable to the local people in the local neighborhood that they can look at and say, I can live here. And it's quality affordable housing. It's not something you slap together and you say, here, there you go. It's something substantial, and it'll be rent stabilized so that they don't feel that they're being pushed out. Because I know a lot of people probably want to live as close to the shore as possible.
I appreciate that. And so you're talking about employment and how that's the best way to kind of cure some of the security issues. But right now, due to the stimulus and some other stuff, it's very hard for business owners to actually find employees. Unemployment, even though it's high, it's very hard to get people that actually want to work. So is there any incentives?
Go ahead. I was going to let you finish your question.
Yeah. So is there any, how do you feel like you can incentivize employees to go back to work and work for local business owners?
Well, we all understand that the stimulus was always a short-term thing. We don't anticipate that there's necessarily going to be more stimulus checks coming. That's not been the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. or Albany. We do know that there are people in the community who will continue to need help. But for the most part, as the economy reopens up, there'll naturally be a demand. The restaurants reopening up, the various business reopening up, that will create a demand for employment. And the other thing is this, obviously, folks want to be able to earn a decent income for them to pay the high rents that they face, et cetera. So having decent income will help. But one of the other things that we really have to consider is, what has this episode, this pandemic, shown us about the change in the job market, and how do we better prepare all of our communities to survive and thrive in a changing job market? You know, when my parents first came to this country, there was a thing called the bank teller, and everybody had to go to the bank teller. Then came the ATM. Then now, I don't even know if we really need to use the ATM, because I could just go online on the internet and take care of all my banking without even using cash money. So our economy is continuing to evolve and change, and therefore our training, our workforce has to evolve and change so that they get better jobs and that they actually want to do these jobs because they pay well enough.
Josh, did I just hear you say crypto? I feel like I heard you say crypto.
I said crypto without saying crypto.
Okay. So we're talking about the changes in the job environment, in the work environment. But in New York City, it looks like since COVID, it needs to get back to its former self. And how do you see New York getting back? How you can help it get back to its feet, getting back to a vibrant economy where the restaurants are flourishing and all small businesses are flourishing as well?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked. So if you Google my name in the Brooklyn paper, you'll see that I wrote an op-ed about what are called business improvement districts. So the business improvement districts can do a lot of things. One of the primary things I would like them to do, we talked about sanitation earlier, is that a business improvement district can have a budget of anywhere between $250,000 to $2.5 million, depending on its scale, how much people are willing to pay to subsidize it and support it, right? One of the key things that they do is they do extra trash pickup. So if you go into downtown Brooklyn, parts of Manhattan, in the business districts, you'll see that there are people who go up and down the street and they clean the street. So it keeps it clean, and people want to shop, they want to eat in places that are neat and clean. Second, the business improvement district office will be in the neighborhood, and they will have a direct link to SBS. SBS is Small Business Services in the city, which provides grants, loans, and other resources to business. But they also are an office that you can go to when you have complaints about being overburdened with ticketing and all these other things. So that will be a resource that's there. If you look at Kingston Avenue, unless things have changed from when I was growing up there, Kingston Avenue is the commercial corridor for that section of Crown Heights. Kingston Avenue could benefit from a business improvement district. And you have to also remember, not every business improvement district is the same. You will have board members who are from the community, the tailor, the bagel shop owner, et cetera, who will sit on the board, and they'll have different ideas that are different from what's done in Williamsburg and in other parts of Crown Heights and Flatbush. And that will be what drives that business improvement district, and it will be reflective of your local community and its business needs. So with that, you'll have a stimulus, you'll have a nicer place for people to do business. And I know in the Crown Heights section, there are people who are visiting internationally because they're of different religious purposes. They'll want to stay there, they'll want to be able to shop there, and it'll stimulate the economy as well locally.
are the local business paying for this business district that you're talking about, or is that something?
It's financed through a property tax assessment. So the property owners have to agree to it. Most property owners will agree to it or have agreed to it because they understand that by having cleaner streets and stores that are not vacant, it increases the value and the appeal of the neighborhood.
That makes sense. And so I want to go back to before where you were talking about being a Democrat and voting, in this city, or, voting democratically, voting as a Democrat in this city is pretty much the only way you could have any sort of make any change or affect the outcome because of because the way the landscape is right now. So going back to there, for people that logged on late or people that are listening now, could you tell the audience again why it's so important, especially now? I know till May 27th you have to register, whoever did not register yet, for the upcoming election.
Yeah, so again, it's not to say that you can't have any power if you're not a Democrat, but you have to think about the fact that there are 51 council seats. Out of those council seats, maybe 3 will remain Republican. So it's going to be a super duper majority Democrat, right? So if you have no representation within the party and you're locked in the super, super small majority, you're really doing your community a disfavor, right? In a district like mine, the next council member will 99.9% chance will be a Democrat. In your assembly districts, it'll be the same thing. And in your state Senate districts, it'll be the same thing. You want to have a voice within the group that is actually going to have the majority and the power to affect change. So I think it's beneficial. And what I'm telling you is exactly what I say in the Caribbean community, in the Black community, in the Spanish community, in the Pakistani community. So if you want to be able to affect change, you have to look at the dynamics of how our city works. This is definitely a Democratic town, and it's going to remain that way for a good while.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And so, there's a Jewish community and there's the Black community, and how do you? Sometimes there's some sort of tension. I mean, how do you bring us together where both communities are, kind of working together to get support for their agendas? Because we're both, in a sense, both of us are somewhat of a minority in the sense that we don't have the bigger ears. And so how do you put the both communities together and try to push things forward?
Well, depending on the structure of your community, I think one of the things you have to do is you have to first acknowledge the existence of your neighbors and people around you, right? We have to understand that that there is a Jewish community. The Jewish community has to understand that there is a Black community. There are cultural differences. There's always cultural differences, regardless of race, etc. But there's also leadership, and leadership has to be more moderating in what it says and how it engages leadership from other communities, right? And where are some of the places where our leaders get to engage each other? One is at the local community board, where we've seen people, we know we have members from the local Jewish community, the Black community, the Hispanic community, the white community, et cetera. So that's one place. Two, when you are elected to represent a district, you're not elected to represent one race or only one community, et cetera. You have to look at it in its totality, and you have to be able to say that I am here to represent every corner of the community. So I've been to Sukkot, I've been to Eid, I've been to Christmas events, et cetera. And I've been to events that are far outside of my community because I understand that as a council member, it's my role to be a voice and to ensure that you feel that you're being served as well. So it's leadership on both sides, but the elected leader has to understand that you represent everyone.
If you're elected, what are some of the first things on your bucket list to accomplish?
Bucket list means things you want to accomplish before you die. I'm not looking to die anytime soon.
Well, no, here's the thing. We're figuring this is a stepping stone. You're going to go to bigger and greater things. So from the city council to the next item. So while you're a city council member, what are the items that you want to accomplish?
The first thing and most pressing thing on my agenda is an economic recovery from this pandemic. I was talking on Facebook Live earlier today to a number of community groups, but I was saying exactly the same thing I'm saying to you now. When you stand outside of the train station, you can see just how few people are going into those train stations, which means very few people are going to work. We need an economic recovery. If nobody's going to work, nobody's stopping by the bagel shop or the coffee shop. And so the bagel guy or the coffee shop will eventually close. We have to ensure that folks are going to work. And if folks are not going to work, then they're not paying tithe, they're not making contributions to the shul or various organizations that are supportive of local communities, and your economy starts to come to a halt. So my number one priority going into it is a pandemic recovery so that we can fully open up the economy and we can have business activity again. Thereafter, I'm going to go aggressively into how we provide folks with affordable housing across the district and in different places. We know that the housing needs in terms of how many bedrooms vary from community to community. And so we know that there are places where 3 and 4 bedrooms will have a better impact. And we know there are places where 1 and 2 bedrooms are more highly desired, but it has to be affordable to local community members. And then thirdly, crime. Unemployment breeds crime. So therefore, we can anticipate if unemployment continues to stay high, we will continue to see increases in crime. We have to not wait for these things to happen, but we have to have a structure in place so that we have the community policing, community members and police officers are working together to prevent crime.
That's great. So for me, this half hour has been very educational. I learned a lot. So, like I said, someone that doesn't know a lot about politics, this has been really good to see things that you've done, things that you could impact. So, as a closing remark, what would you want to leave us with before we finish this session?
Yeah. So what I would say to you is what we have here is a representative democracy. That means you democratically elect someone to be your representative. I know what it feels like to feel that you are an outsider. You're not part of the greater population, and therefore maybe your voice is not heard. That is the last thing that I want to do to any other community. Not any other Black community, not any other language community, Hispanic, Urdu speaking, not any religious community, etc. So me running to be your council member is to be a voice for you. I will sit down with your leadership on a routine and ordinary basis. I will hear your concerns, and we'll come to situations where it'll be rough, but we will get through it because we understand that we are here to work together, not against each other. And that's why I'm running to be your next council member in the 40th district. So if you live in that Kingston area, south of Empire Boulevard, where the young girls school is and going towards Wingate High School, I encourage you to come out and vote for me, Josier Pierre. And by the way, Josier is Joshua in French.
I love that. Well, Josier, thank you so much. We're rooting for you, and I appreciate you giving us your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night, all. Be well.